Hey, what's up, guys? This is Norb.
And this is Mike.
And we are the Watchmen.
The men who watch.
Because if it's on a screen, we're watching it and talking about it and sharing it with you guys.
Today is going to be a really fun show. We are going to talk about our 5 favorite comedies from the decade of the 80s.
Oh, yeah. This was so many good, funny memories and great movies here. As always, hard to pick, but you got to get it down to 5, and that's what today's show is all about. So before we get into it, though, I just want to thank you guys for those of you watching on YouTube and those listening on our podcast. Thank you very much. We hope you'll continue to listen and watch and support the show. Let's do this thing, Mike. 80s, that's kind of our childhood, our adolescence, and these movies just sort of represent that whole age. It's like the coming out age for us in terms of, you know, going from kids to becoming more mature. And these movies all, I think, had some part of that process of being a kid and growing up. And these movies were such a big part of that, I'm sure.
Yeah, and some of them I saw in the theater, and some of them I saw at my friend's house on Showtime.
Yeah, right. Yeah, a lot of these were video rentals that I didn't see in the theater, but watched many times on illegally copied VHS tapes. So
in the 80s, for those of you that are a little bit younger, the first time you could really watch big time feature movies at home was when Showtime and HBO, which stands for Home Box Office, came out. And it was this little box you had to rent from either Showtime or HBO that they'd ship it to you, and you'd put it on top of your TV and your cable would run through it, and it allowed you to watch feature films commercial free. And if you didn't have the box, you just get a channel that was all garbly goop, but the sound was always fine, so you could sometimes still make things out. We never had it at my house, so once in a while I'd flip to that channel and just try to make out what movie I thought was playing. But my friend had Showtime, so I'd go to his house a lot.
Yeah, I have to tell you, this is in the early days of my college house, before you moved in. We had one of the early cable boxes that had an actual rotary dial, and it was one of the last of its kind. So literally, like, you turned it, and we didn't have a lot of paid channels, but if you put it right between 2 channels, you could pick up paid channels. I could pick up HBO if you went right between like 13 and 14 and put it right in between. It was awesome. It was the greatest thing. And then they made us upgrade our boxes and took it back. We were so disappointed because then we had to pay for it. It was so great, though. I remember, I think the movie channel or Cinemax or something was the hardest one. It's like really, I had to just dial it in perfectly between the two. But anyway, that was late 80s when that happened, but we're talking, or early 90s, but we're talking 80s here. I can't wait to hear what's on your list. I'm sure we might have a movie. I'm betting, if I were a betting man, that there's going to be at least one movie on here that we share.
I think
maybe
so too.
2, maybe 3. We'll see. But
yeah,
I'm excited to hear what's on your list.
I think we're going to share them. The Brule Mystery will be the similar number 2, number 1.
Yeah, right.
In rank. So
let's go.
So starting with my number 5. And just to give a place of things, the way I did my research is I Googled a bunch of top lists of comedies from the 80s, and I even went to just lists of comedies from the 80s. And what was shocking, and when I say shocking, I mean shocking, is that this comedy was not on any of those lists. It wasn't even listed under comedies from the 80s, and I was blown away. So my number 5, and I don't even know if you've actually seen this, but I'm going to kind of have fun and see if you can figure it out as I articulate the story. So it's a story about Chuck is a guy who works alone at night in the city morgue, and he likes the peace and quiet, and his boss tells him he's going to get a new partner. And the first night his new partner shows up, he's looking at the door, the entrance to the morgue, and there's the glass pane of the door that's kind of that old foggy glass. And you hear this voice, and the voice is singing a song, and it's going, na 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 na, and the shadow is coming closer and closer, and then the door flies open, and it's Michael Keaton, and he says, "Hey." So if you haven't figured it out, the movie is called Night Shift.
Yeah, Night Shift. Great film. I can't believe that's not any of those lists.
It wasn't on any of them, and it's
Wow.
a travesty. Travesty.
Well, it's on this list at least.
So, Night Shift is a 1982 American comedy film directed by Ron Howard, who was Richie Cunningham from the old show Happy Days. And I mean, Ron Howard is now pretty well known as a famous Hollywood director. The story is concerning a timid night shift employee whose life is turned upside down by a new coworker who fancies himself a free-spirited entrepreneur. It stars Howard's Happy Days co-star Henry Winkler, who we all know as Fonzie.
The Fonz.
Along with Michael Keaton in his first starring role. This is the movie that made Michael Keaton a movie star. I don't think many people know that.
Yeah.
Shelley Long co-stars along with Richard Belzer and Clint Howard, and there are brief scenes with a very young Kevin Costner as frat boy number 1, Shannon Doherty as a Bluebell Scout, Vincent Scavelli as a man who delivers a sandwich, and Charles Fleischer as one of the jail prisoners. The title song, Night Shift, was performed by Quarterflash, which was a big band in the 80s from Portland, Oregon. But I saw this on Showtime, because it's rated R, so I shot it on Showtime at my friend's house, and I laughed so hard. It was so funny. It was also surprising to see Fonzie playing such a timid, meek type of character.
Right.
But Michael Keaton was this crazy guy. He was the yin to Chuck's yang in the movie. And one of the funniest little things about Michael Keaton's character is that he would carry around with him a microcassette recorder. And he would say, I always got these ideas, and when these ideas come into my head, I gotta talk into the tape. So he would say, at one point he says, we're gonna make Chuck a man. Because
that's right.
to him, Chuck is boring. And of course, this lends itself to a really important scene where because Chuck can't stand Bill. Can't stand him. He's total opposite of what he wants, peace and quiet. He just wants to be left alone. And of course, Bill is all about, let's be friends, let's make this cool. And so at one point he gets under Chuck's nerves so much, Chuck screams at him and grabs his micro cassette recording. Remember, he says, this is Chuck telling Bill to shut up.
Oh yeah. Later, does he keep playing it over?
He hears, and then he hears the tape going, this is Chuck telling Bill to shut up. Shut up. Shut up. This is Chuck telling Bill to shut up. And he realized that Bill is lying in one of the morgue drawers, playing this over and over, and he pulls the drawer out to see him just lying there with the tape recorder, just playing it over and over.
I forgot about that. Well, so that show, that's great. It's not on my list, but the other great part in that, I mean, Michael Keaton is awesome in that, but remember he gives so they turn this place into basically, they run like a prostitution ring.
Love brokers!
But he does this, Michael Keaton does this sort of rah-rah speech with a chalkboard.
I know, I wasn't gonna talk about it because it's a little R-rated, but it is funny as heck.
He breaks down the word prostitution into different components.
Into different parts of
which kind of self-explanatory.
You're just gonna have to see the movie.
To keep away, but doesn't really apply. It's so bad. It's so hilarious.
That was such a memorable moment of that movie.
That was great. I could just watch that scene over and over again. That was good. God, you got me crying over here. I forgot about the.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why Night Shift is a great comedy. And if you haven't seen it, it's a must-watch.
That is a good one. I have to say, but I have to preface before we go into this. My lifelong friend who I've known since kindergarten, my buddy Rob Portman, we've been friends, like I said, since I remember any memories of life. He's been there. And all of these movies, I think we watched together at some point, whether it was on video or in a movie theater, but it's synonymous with my friendship because we went through those adolescent days of growing up, then going through middle school, then eventually high school, and even living together for the early part of college. And so all of these movies, I have to kind of dedicate to my buddy Rob because we went and lived these movies, and all those samples from these shows are something that's like ingrained in our friendship. So I know Rob's probably listening to this. Rob, this show is definitely for you because any one of these shows I think of, there's a memory of you attached to it. So,
and just one other little tidbit of information: the that's actually Jumping Jack Flash by the Rolling Stones.
Yes, right.
Made that song famous as well. By the way, he's just singing the I mean, and that in history is the first time you hear Michael Keaton. And he went on to be
That is
Batman
pretty wild.
and in just hundreds of
so many
movies.
other great roles. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, to start at the bottom of my 5, number 5 is The Naked Gun. It's directed by David Zucker, starring Leslie Nielsen. He plays an incompetent police detective, Frank Drebin, and he has to foil an attempt of an assassination of Queen Elizabeth II. It also co-stars Priscilla Presley as his love interest, and O.J. Simpson, back before he was behind bars, and he was pretty darn funny in that show, playing a character, Nordberg, which is awfully close to my name, Norbert.
Yeah, Nordberg.
The opening scene with that, it was hilarious. This was, Leslie Nielsen was a great comedy actor because he had such a way of doing everything just deadpan serious, which made it so funny. Everything he did in the show was delivered with such so seriously, and that's why everything was so funny. It was written with Leslie Nielsen delivering these lines. So many moments that just this was early college laughs for me in this show, and just nice beaver. Thanks, I just got it stuffed. I mean, it's just this is a great show. Watched it, had it on tape, watched it so many times, and I couldn't start my list without at least mentioning the Naked Gun, which has been watched many times in my memory of 80s comedies. You've seen this one, right, Mike?
I've never seen it. No, I'm just kidding. Of course I've seen it.
I don't know, everybody's seen this.
The Naked Gun is my honorable mention on my list. And
okay.
I made it an honorable mention because it's really a tribute to the Zaz brothers, Abrams Zucker, who created Airplane, Airplane 2, The Naked Gun, The Naked Gun 2, The Naked Gun 33 and a third. Those guys, they had this, how would you describe their comedy? A lot of it was just physical comedy, slapsticky gags, a lot of just funny voice gags, like in Airplane, there's a call for you on the red phone, and so he picks up the blue phone, and you hear, no, the red phone. So he hangs up the blue phone, picks up the red phone. Do you remember Top Secret? Top Secret,
yeah. Yep.
So again, all the comedies were of a very particular style that the Zaz brothers were known for doing, and
I guess
The Naked Gun is one of my favorites.
Yeah. The play on words.
Plays on words.
All those kind of could lump together in sort of the same almost kind of genre of its own. But surely you can't be serious. I am serious. Don't call me Shirley. That stuff is awesome. And
Give
only
me the Clarence, what's your Victor?
Yep, that stuff is so good. But yeah, all those sort of play off of each other, and it's a great parody. They're all parodies of something that had been done before.
Well, and what's sad is they don't make comedies like that anymore.
Well, they were so not PC. They wouldn't. Some shows do that. There are some shows that gotta get edgy, but for the most part, they stay away from some of the stuff that really cross the line on some of those things. They're very sexual. There are a lot of sexual, things, a lot of racial things in there, stereotypes.
Yeah, that's
they won't do that now. It's just too taboo to cross that line on some of these the comedies today. So yeah, if you want some good raw un-PC material to watch anything from Abrams Zucker, because that stuff is raw and so good. So anyway, Naked Gun starts my list off. So number 4, what do you got?
So my number 4 is, give you a little hint, it's a Casio.
Oh yes.
My number 4 is Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, John Hughes movie. Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is a 1987 American road buddy comedy film written, produced, and directed by John Hughes. The film stars Steve Martin as Neil Page, a high-strung marketing executive, and John Candy as Del Griffith, a good-hearted but annoying shower curtain ring salesman. Who sells shower curtain rings? I don't know. They share a 3-day odyssey of misadventures trying to get Neil home to Chicago in time for Thanksgiving with his family. Obviously, John Hughes is such a big part of comedy in the 80s. I know we're going to have one or two John Hughes films in our list for sure. But Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, I'm a huge Steve Martin fan. Always loved Steve Martin. And I loved him in this movie, and I've got to have Steve Martin in a movie on my top 5 list. It is a must. And, he and John Candy had the perfect chemistry. I know you like this movie as well. We've talked about it at length, and even Kevin Bacon has a surprise uncredited cameo at the very beginning.
Yeah, at the beginning, he's chasing down a cab.
Get a cab to get to the airport. But it poked humor at just what it means to have to hang out and travel with someone who makes you uncomfortable, and you really wish you could get rid of them, but you're trying to be nice at the same time because there's a side of you that you want to be nice. You don't want to hurt their feelings, and this movie is a lot about that.
Where's your other hand? Between two pillows.
Those aren't pillows.
Those aren't pillows. Oh, that's such a good show. Yeah, good memories on that one. It was on it's not on my top 5, but it would be on my top 10. It floated in and out on 5 as I was kind of making my list. No, this one probably takes, but that's definitely one of my favorites. It had a lot of heart to it. That's the other side. There was actually a very emotional part of that show touching at the end when it's like you get past Dell's annoying personality and you find out the real story behind why he's on the road all the time. And I think we can be spoiler.
We can
spoil his past. This movie's been out here for 30 years or something. But when you find out his wife's been dead for 10 years or however long it's been, it's like, oh my gosh, you just feel like a heel because Steve Martin's been treating this guy like crap the entire time, and then you find out this guy's been carrying the picture of his dead wife everywhere he goes, and he's just a sad guy. And so in the end, he brings him home for Thanksgiving, and it's such a warm story. But that was the beauty of John Hughes, is that he had such a natural way with comedy, butt-gusting comedy. But there was always heart to those stories. There was always a nice thematic, life tale to be told underneath all that. So that's what made John Hughes so good, and why I'm sure he's on many more films on this list to come. But yeah, I love that show as well. So,
and this movie is rated R, but it's actually only rated R for language. There's a big scene where Steve Martin gets upset at a rental car counter and starts yelling. He says, "First of all, you can wipe that smile off your face." And he goes into a tirade of F-bombs. Of F-bombs. And it's very funny.
It's hilarious.
But that's what got it the R rating.
Yep. All right. Well, so moving on to my number 4 would be a John Landis film. If you guys remember the director, John Landis, Trading Places. This is the story about a snobbish investor played by Dan Aykroyd and a wily street con artist played by Eddie Murphy, who find their positions reversed as part of a bet by 2 callous millionaires. Also stars Jamie Lee Curtis as the love interest in the show. This, again, is one of those great shows that I think it was to credit to my buddy Rob, who I think is the one who brought this movie to my attention, because I did not have, I didn't have the pay channels at my house. So I had to find out all the good stuff from Rob. He was the one who brought all the R-rated comedies over to me, and we'd watch them on rental movie nights and stuff like that. So this show is great. I think this is around the time when Eddie Murphy was just career was starting to take off. And the early days of Eddie Murphy, whether you go with Saturday Night Live, and so was Dan Aykroyd, that transition from when he left from Saturday Night Live into the movie side of things was awesome. And this kind of represents sort of that pinnacle, I think, of the 2 guys who had left Saturday Night Live and now combining on a fantastic movie with John Landis, who was one of the best comedy directors also during the 80s. This movie is just fantastic. It was just a cool story of, rich guy, dude on the street. They get switched, and so just the whole fish out of water of a rich guy stuck in the slums and a poor guy suddenly thrown into the penthouse. That whole thing was just a brilliant, brilliant story, brilliant premise, and so much fun. And then with Jamie Lee Curtis looking really good in there, by the way. I think that was one of the next movies after she did Halloween, and just one, if you haven't seen it, I would be surprised, but you got to watch it again because there's some good zingers, good laughs in that movie. So one of my favorites, Trading Places, at number 4.
I saw Trading Places back in the 80s, and it didn't resonate with me quite the same. I know I laughed, but sadly I can't remember much about that movie just because I haven't seen it since. So it's just not as at the top of my brain, but I did see it, and I don't remember not liking it. I just can't remember the details. I need you to act out one of them for me.
Jeez. I'm trying to think of what's a good, I don't know if I have anything off the top of my head. This is not one of those movies that had the sampling type of repetibility that I've had from other movies that are on this list. I'm trying to think if there's something good on there.
That's okay.
I can't think of one. It's also got the bad guy who I forgot the actor's name, but he always plays the bad guy in all those movies. He was the police chief in Die Hard. What's that actor?
Oh yeah, he was in Breakfast Club.
He's always the prick.
Yeah.
And the principal in Breakfast Club. He was a character in this show. He's like the strength, the bodyguard guy for the evil millionaires, and he had a role in this thing too. But anyway, sorry, I don't have any quotes for you on this one.
It's okay.
Mine's blanking. This is a good show.
So on to my number 3, and this is a movie I didn't see in the 80s. It was a very, very under the radar film, but I have Rob to thank for telling me this is one you gotta see. And that is a very unknown movie called 3 O'Clock High.
Oh yeah.
3 O'Clock High is a 1987 American high school black comedy from Universal Pictures that stars Casey Siemaszko as a meek high school student who is coerced into fighting a much larger and intimidating transfer student with a prior bad reputation. That transferred student's name is Buddy Revell, played by Richard Tyson. Anne Ryan, Jeffrey Tambor, Philip Baker Hall, and John P. Ryan co-star as fellow high school students and staff. The premise of the story is the journalism teacher assigns Jerry the job of doing a welcome article about Buddy, since Buddy's the new kid and Jerry works at the paper. So Jerry runs into Buddy in the bathroom and tries to say hi and talk to him, but it doesn't go well. But what he doesn't know about Buddy is Buddy has this thing about being touched. And Jerry touches him on the shoulder and says, let's just forget the article. And so Buddy goes bananas and slams him against the wall and says at 3 o'clock, they will have a fight in the school parking lot. And so the movie is Jerry spending the rest of that school day trying all kinds of ways to get out of the fight, all to failure. What's great about this movie is the fight happens, and it's a good fight. It's got the payoff. Sometimes movies go down that road where you think you're going down to a big finale and it kind of fizzles. And 3 O'Clock High paid off in spades in the end, and the whole humor was just constantly, and I think a lot of it really resonated for me growing up in the 80s, because in the 80s there were a lot of bullies. Today it's a lot better out there. There's a lot of anti-bullying, and it's helped, I think, a lot of kids these days save them from getting picked on. But in the 80s, there was a different mindset. The mindset was, hey man, defend yourself. If people pick on you, you fight back. You got to learn to be tough. And well, there were kids that scared the crap out of me in the 80s, and all I did was try to avoid them. And so in this movie, Jerry is trying to avoid Buddy. He's scared beyond all means. And even he goes to a class, and the class has a science film about the praying mantis. And it's like Jerry's the weak bug that the praying mantis is going to attack and kill. And it's that, like, you're sitting there watching that thinking, that's me, I'm dead. And I can identify with that. It had one more memorable scene where Jerry tries to talk a football player into telling Buddy to leave him alone, and he pays him $100. And so the football player approaches Buddy in the library and says, you need to leave Jerry alone, and he puts his hand on Buddy's shoulder. And Buddy gets up and just pummels the football player with his fist, and he falls against a stack of bookcases in the library that then knocks over another stack of bookcases, another stack, and it's a domino effect. All these bookcases go, 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 all around the library, and it's real. There's no visual effects. It was something else to see. It was just, I rewound it and watched it, I think, a few more times, just because I was so impressed with how they achieved that practical effect in the movie. So I have a feeling you haven't seen this movie.
I saw it, but this isn't one of those movies I saw multiple times. there's so many movies I'd seen a bunch of times. I think I just saw it the one time, but my memory of this is very foggy, and it certainly is not on my top 5 or top 10 list. But I know it's I don't have. This is a foggy memory on this one, and I know my buddy Rob loves this show, and our pal Kurt as well. You know, would talk about this, one of the most underrated shows. But yeah, this one that just never really was on my rewatch list. I saw it a long time ago, and I kind of moved on from it. But I know it's one I think my friends hold in much higher regard than my memory of it is.
You know, you should show this one to your girls. I think that's one to show to the girls. Because the great thing about it is it really does capture high school. They do a good job. It feels real. Even
I need to watch this again. Yeah.
The whole way the movie starts out is the camera's kind of floating past different kids walking up to school, and you hear bits and pieces of their conversation, and it has a very realistic, authentic feel to it. And I could definitely identify with Jerry's fear of getting beat up at the end of the day.
I think we've all, my daughters, I think for the most part, have been spared by that threat of feeling like someone's going to beat you up, you know. But there's always that person that you know of or you hear about, you know, that's, you know, picking on other people and stuff like that. So they've seen that. Obviously, it's different in this day and age, but it still exists. But for me, yeah, I had my share of being bullied, that's for sure. Being one of the only Asian guys in a mostly white school district at the time back in the 80s, I took some flack, you know, often some misguided, wrong racial slurred flack going my way. I've been called the N-word. I was called other ethnic, you know, races. I'm like in my head going, you don't even know what race I'm at. What I'm actually am. You're calling me something else. All they know is that you're not white, so I'm going to call you something that I can remember. But
yeah, it's just you're different.
It was not fun. I remember a kid taking my lunch money, and I remember there was a guy, speaking of Rob, I mentioned in the beginning of the show, there was a time when there was a guy named Tim Bennett, and he always drew sharks on my notebooks and stuff. But there was one time I think he was picking on me, and Rob tried to sort of defend me, and he threw some blades of grass at him or something, and he acted like, oh my eye! He said something like he was gonna get him back for that, and Rob lived in fear of Tim Bennett for a long time. So that was one of those names that was just, watch out for Tim Bennett. Tim Bennett's coming. And I wonder what Tim Bennett's doing these days. Should Facebook him and find out what he's up to. But and for a long time, he was like the name of fear back in elementary school. But anyway, yeah, need to go check that one out. Needs a refresher course on that one. All right, so go to my number 3 movie. Another one of my favorites I had to put on this list. It's another John Landis film, and this one is Coming to America. Coming to America is about an extremely pampered African prince played by Eddie Murphy, who travels to Queens, New York with his sidekick pal Arsenio Hall and goes undercover to find a wife that he can respect for her intelligence and her will. Also co-stars James Earl Jones, who plays the king of, I forgot the name of the country that they're from, the African nation that he's from, but James Earl Jones plays the king. And this was a great film. I think what it stands out, if for those of you who've seen it and remember what was special about it, was how Eddie Murphy played a multitude, actually him and Arsenio Hall played a multitude of characters in this show. I want to say there was like 5 different characters that he plays. So Eddie Murphy played himself, he played the old guy in the barber shop. He played the sexual chocolate, the singer. So glow. That guy, he played that singer. There was some more too, and Arsenio Hall also played at least 3 or 4 characters in that show. But that was what was so fun, just seeing all these different, you know, makeup effects to transform these guys in different roles. But it was just so full of funny scenes that are just countless throughout the story. And again, it had good heart to it. One thing that really makes this show special to me is that this is years later, in the last few years, and had the opportunity to meet the writer of this movie. Remember that, Mike?
I do.
Met David Sheffield because of a contact of someone who lives up here, who used to be in the business, and worked at Paramount. They were involved in the production business together. He happened to be in town. I got to sit down with the guy who wrote Coming to America, and it was so fun to basically just throw out lines and quotes and bring up scenes and have the guy who wrote it talk about, oh yeah, that was fun to do.
I think we made his day.
It was great. Yeah, you remember that? It was such a rare, never thought this would ever happen. And to actually be sitting down with one of my most favorite comedies of the 80s and the writer was right there. It was almost,
that was cool.
it was surreal, but a very special moment to be able to sit with the person who actually wrote that script. So great movie, great memories during and after, years later, with that experience.
I definitely loved Coming to America. It's not on my top 5 list, but a good movie. I think when I think about that movie, one of the best jokes was really one of the more subtle ones. But there's a whole thing with this guy who owns a restaurant named McDowell's, and it looks like McDonald's. It's got the same colors. They have similar golden arches, and because Eddie Murphy's character ends up working there, and the owner of McDowell's is talking about, they got the Big Mac, we got the Big Mick. And everything is just clearly a ripoff. But there's a very subtle moment where he goes into the guy's office and he's reading a McDonald's crew training manual. And he quickly folds it up and puts it away, basically hiding that he's stealing from the competition. But it was a subtle little joke, but I remember I really liked that one. Well,
there's another one too, and I know that I never had the pleasure of working in a McDonald's. I know you did, and I know you did. So I know you had to have had a good tickle of fun memories when. God, what was the name of the actor? He was also a Saturday Night Live guy, I think, too. He was the guy who was playing. He was doing the. Remember, he talks about.
I know what you're talking about.
Right now, I'm. Gosh, I wish I had the quote in front of me.
I can do it for you.
Do it.
He says, "I'm doing burgers." He says, "But pretty soon, if I work really hard, they're gonna move me up to fries." And then he says, "And after that, I might actually be taking orders." And he makes it like it's such a big
but then
deal.
He goes, and then. They promote me to assistant manager.
That's right.
And that's right. When the big bucks start rolling in.
That's when the big bucks start rolling in.
And that's when Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall look at each other like, oh, God, are you kidding me? That was great. And I thought you because you worked that fun time.
It's true. My first job in high school was working at McDonald's, and I made $3.35 an hour, which was a minimum wage at the time. And I will never forget, after I'd worked there 6 months, my boss had a talk with me, and she reviewed my performance, and she said, "You're doing a really good job, so we're going to give you a $0.10 an hour raise." So instead of $3.35, you're going to get $3.45 an hour. And I remember it was like she'd handed me the golden keys. And I believed it. I went home and thought, I'm making $0.10 more an hour. That means after 8-hour shift, I'm going to get 80 cents more a day. That's a gallon of gas.
Yep, that's true.
Oh.
Oh, man. Perspective, folks. Perspective. 80s perspective. Okay, so
all right.
Where are we at? Number 2.
Number 2. I will say my number 2 and number 1, it was a difficult decision, but I feel very strongly about the choice I made. So my number 2 involves a very familiar catchphrase called "Who You Gonna Call?" And that's the Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters is a 1984 American supernatural comedy film directed by Yvonne Reitman and written by Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis. It stars Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, and Ramis as, respectively, Peter Venkman, Ray Stantz, and Egon Spengler, a trio of eccentric parapsychologists who start a ghost-catching business in New York City. The film also stars Sigourney Weaver and Rick Moranis, and features Annie Potts, William Atherton, and Ernie Hudson in supporting roles. I would like to think most people watching have seen Ghostbusters, and when I went to that movie, it was one of those experiences where I came out of the theater, I was laughing so hard. I was also scared a little bit. Some of the ghosts were a little creepy. The science fiction side of the story with the special effects were terrific. I thought the coolest thing ever was when the Ghostbusters finally got the big time. They did all these mock magazine covers of them using famous magazines like Time and Omni. And I remember they would fly, they had a montage where they'd fly the covers across the screen and talk about and show them on the cover. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. I thought they got USA Today to like make a mock newspaper front page of the Ghostbusters. And to me, that just made it real. It's like they tied in the movie side of the world with the real world by having these real magazine covers designed, obviously with approval of the magazine people who are making them. But so many great lines. Where do these stairs go? They go up.
They go up. Yep.
I could go on, and not to mention a great soundtrack. And Who You Gonna Call, a legend in 80s songs, and I bought the Ghostbusters soundtrack and listened to the whole thing over and over. And so, hands down, my number 2. I could go on and on about Ghostbusters, but Norb, I am curious: is Ghostbusters in your list?
You know what's funny is it's not.
Oh my gosh!
But it's funny because I think when I think of Ghostbusters, I don't think of it as a comedy. I guess
who's
it is a
screaming at you right now? Brandon Brazier is screaming at you.
I know. Well, it is, and that's one of my top movies. And yet, when I was thinking about comedies, I don't know. I guess I put that almost in. I guess it is a comedy, but yet I was thinking, when I would think about that movie, I'd put it in something else of a category.
I don't know how you do that. I do not know how you do that.
It's a ghost movie. But
it starred
I know, you're right.
Guys from Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, that's true. I really do think that I was putting Ghostbusters in a different, much like Braveheart didn't make my action list because I'm saving it for a list that feels more appropriate where it belongs. But no, I did not put Ghostbusters on my list, even though that is one of the best movies that made me laugh, for sure.
He slimed me.
Yep.
I'm sorry. That one to me is a comedy all the way. I mean, some comedies have special effects.
Yeah. Well, I didn't put it on my list. I had other ones that were kind of the forefront of what I have as my comedy history of the 80s that epitomizes it for me. And so for my number 2, I've got the movie Vacation. This is the John Hughes movie, the story about Clark Griswold, who decides to take his family on a cross-country journey to Wally World in the family truckster. Stars Chevy Chase, Beverly D'Angelo, and his son, of course, Anthony Michael Hall, with a cameo by John Candy. This movie was, again, another one that Rob brought to my attention because I wouldn't have found this on my own. And definitely was on one of those VHS tape copies that I watched many, 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 many times. But this story, we could all relate because we've all been on cross-country journeys in the car. We had a station wagon that looked not that different from what they had in the movie. And that whole, just everything from the scene where they're driving along and then the camera pans from everybody sleeping to the driver falling asleep. That would be me. Dozing off at the wheel.
That was a good moment.
Even ridiculous stuff. I remember laughing. Remember the beginning when Chevy Chase is planning the route and it's on the computer and he's showing them where they're going to go. And then his son starts taking over the controller and he's putting like aliens in there and trying to attack the vehicle and Pac-Man. And then the daughter comes in and shoots down the Pac-Man. It's like, this would never happen. It's like, no way, yet it's funny. It's funny the way they put it together. So that, and then just throughout, oh gosh, so many funny things with Aunt Edna, who dies along the way, and with her dog, who he left chained to the bumper on the back. We'll pick up the rest of the carcass. All that stuff was hilarious. So this movie, just from its rewatchability factor and early Chevy Chase gold, Vacation in my number 2.
Good song too. Holiday Road. Yep. Lindsey Buckingham from Fleetwood Mac. Well, that gets us to the number 1. So the big question is, do we have the same number 1?
I'd like to, so far we've had less than I thought we would, but I'd like to think that we will land on this one.
So my number 1 is a movie that changed my life in how I felt about comedy in the 80s, and it spoke to me. I went home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I wanted to see it again. Ferris Bueller spoke to me.
Yes.
And he literally did speak to me. So it starts out with a typical movie. where he's sick and doesn't feel like going to school, and his parents say, well, you should stay home, and then they say goodbye and close the door. And then he did something I've never seen before. He turned right to me and he said, they bought it.
Yep.
And then this great 80s synth riff kicks in by it's called F1 Love Missile F111. Yep. Dun, 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 just this hard pounding synth beat. And he says, how can I possibly stay at home on a day like this? Whips open the curtains, you've got a montage, and then he starts just talking to you, and they start having bullet points of the keys to fake out the parents. And he talks about the clammy hands. He says, well, maybe that's it. It says, oh no, is flashing. And I think at that point, I was just dumbfounded that he's talking to me, I'm getting a lesson, and they're having text bullet points on the screen. And from that point, I was in like Flynn.
Yeah. He has the scratched out bullet point about the some people think a phony fever is the way to go, but you get a nervous mom, that means a trip to the doctor's office, and that's worse than school. I mean, that was that show. I think what's cool about that, that's my number one as well. I love this movie for so many reasons. I recently watched this with my girls. I hadn't seen it in a long time, even though I know this like the back of my hand almost. We watched it less than a month ago, and they actually enjoyed it. And especially my youngest daughters are hard to sell when it comes to showing her stuff from the 80s, because she's got these high standards. She doesn't like to watch old stuff. So the fact that they enjoyed it and were laughing was great. But I had forgotten how many funny little subtle things were in that movie. We had to rewind and watch a couple times. There's a part where Rooney, the principal, who's great, he's such a crazy dude in that show. There's
Jeffrey
a part
Jones.
Where he has to run to take care of this situation, and he's running down the hall. But every time he crosses in front of a classroom, he starts walking calmly. So he's running, walk, running, walk, and it was. I'd forgotten all about that, and I was busting out laughing because it's so hilarious.
Because he's the guy that always has to look proper. Like so
every time he crosses the window, he doesn't want to make sure he's seen running, so he slowly walks as he crosses the window of the door. And that's just one of a million funny things in that show. With the synth. I mean, all that stuff. And I think the reason that movie spoke to us, we were seniors in high school when that movie came out. And being that he was a senior in high school when this was going on, we were all going through the same exact thing that he was portraying in that movie. And so much I think about a movie is often what time in your life you watch stuff like this. And the fact that the character, who, as you said, is talking to you in a way that you've never seen before, but he's going through the same struggles that his friend and his girlfriend are going through, thinking about college and, just getting through high school and what's my future and all that stuff, and dealing with parents. It had such a connection to what life was like at that time. And I think it's different now. You could show that. I think I could show it to my girls, and if they were seniors, they'd connect more to it. But they were seniors. They're seniors. They would be seniors now. But to be a senior in 86, 87, watching Ferris as a senior high school student in 86, 87 was like perfect timing. And I'm with you. This movie was we would watch it with our friends over and over and over and over and over again. And I think about that and I think of springtime closing in on graduation in 87. I mean, that movie was what was on. That was what we were watching. If we were hanging out, we'd pop it in and just start playing it over and over again.
Well, and I have family that live in Chicago, and they are oh so proud that John Hughes is from their town, because John Hughes put Chicago into every one of his movies. He'd film his movies in Chicago. He was Chicago lifeblood, true and true, and what a great thing to be proud of. I think I wish John Hughes had grown up in Seattle and made Seattle the part of all his films, because there's so much Chicago in these movies. And I think about even the subtle thing where Rooney goes into the bar and he says to the bartender, there's a Bears game on, and he says, what's the score? The guy goes, nothing. He goes, oh, who's winning? Clearly it wasn't. The guy looks at him like, you weren't even listening to me. He goes, the Bears.
Yeah. It was a football team, so I was really not, not paying attention.
Didn't care less. other little things about this movie too is at the very end it made a song by Yellow famous called "Oh Yeah." Bow, bow. But what's cool about "Oh Yeah" is it played during the credits, and I can't remember a time before that where when the credits were rolling, they treated you to another part of the movie. It's the whole part where Rooney gets on the bus and has to dejectedly get on the bus and ride home when he's been torn up by dogs, dejected, he lost, he never got Ferris, and he walks all the way to the back and sits, you know, and there's a girl that says, "Here's, would you like a gummy bear? It's been in my pocket, it's really warm and soft," and he throws it away. And then the bus drives away at the end of the credits. So you don't really have to read the credits. You can just watch this little mini story. But after that, which is something that still happens today, is a lot of people stay to the end of the credits because they're hoping for a little surprise. And at the end of Ferris Bueller, he walks up and looks at the camera and he says, "You're still here. The movie's over. Go home.
Go home.
Go." And he walks off, and it ended the same way it started for me. It was mind-blowing how he spoke to us all the way to the very end. So there's no other movie that could be my number one.
Yep, well, I agree. It was the perfect movie, the perfect type of movie of that to come out at the time that we couldn't have been at any more ideal time for us to appreciate that. So surprisingly, that was the only movie you and I were in sync on, but I'm glad we landed number one on that one. That for sure, the most defining comedy of the 80s for us.
Well, and actually it's the perfect segue into my surprise, being that Ferris Bueller is our number one. You couldn't ask for a more perfect timing, but I love a physical media. A place called La La Land Records came out with a limited run of the Ferris Bueller's Day Off soundtrack, and they only made 5,000 copies. I got one of them. I also bought one for my brother-in-law in Chicago. But the track list of this, most soundtracks, as you know, Norb, they'll have about 10 songs. This actually has, well, count them, 35 tracks.
Whoa. And
it has little parts. It just has the, like, 11-second scenes where, like, he says, Bueller, Ferris Bueller. You remember the the little James Bond?
Yeah, James Bond.
It's got that on there.
Does it have the, when Cameron was in Egypt's land, let my Cameron go.
Yep.
Awesome.
The only thing not on the soundtrack is the Beatles song, because they couldn't license that.
Couldn't license that one. Yeah.
But they have the band version of it, because remember the band played it too.
Yeah, they were playing along with it. So,
but also, what's cool about these physical media copies is inside there's a jacket insert, and it actually has a very well-written tribute to John Hughes and about the way he made movies. And I actually wanted to read you, I read it earlier, and I wanted to read you just a little paragraph about it. And it's a lot about how John Hughes really cared about music in his movies, and he really listened to a lot of music. It was very important to him to continue to be in touch with teens by the music he picked. So the music supervisor on the movie, his name was Tarquin Gosh, but this little expert, it says, Hughes and Gosh would pull coffee-powered all-nighters, listening to boxes full of cassette tapes and LPs, looking for just the right match. The Hollywood paradigm was, if you have a soundtrack album, go after the big names. Release the single up front to sell the movie, and if the soundtrack sold, that was a bonus. John's attitude was completely different. He loved the music. He was listening to the music. The music inspired the films in many ways. And his paradigm was that his core audience, the boys and girls in America who would like his teen films, were ahead of the curve. They were ahead of radio and ahead of television. What they wanted was new bands. They didn't want famous names. It was a marriage made in heaven, because that had been my job for the last 10 years, to know the bands that were coming up and to spot the good ones. Gosh would try out the occasional American band for Hughes, but the Brits almost always won out, as did many of the bands in Gosh's Rolodex. Just a real way to just summarize how much John Hughes cared about music, and the music in his movies was really memorable, and it was usually 80s stuff you'd never heard, but it was cool.
Yeah, right.
Like that song at the beginning. the other little expert I wanted to read was just something the editor talked to about working with John. He basically said, they talked about when they started to edit the movie. When Hughes joined the editor in LA for post-production, the editor said, "We were set up in a little building on the Paramount lot that was entirely for us. It had been converted from vaults for nitrate film, and there were all these pipes in the ceiling. I guess it was like an elaborate sprinkler system ready to go at any second in case the nitrate caught on fire. They brought in an old beat-up couch, and John would lie on it. Working with him felt like going over to somebody's house and going down to their basement rec room and hanging out all day. He was a terrific raconteur, and he would engage in storytelling based on what happened that weekend or whatever. And he would start to get on a roll. And he was the funniest person I've ever known. If he had been in a nightclub, I would have paid money to see him perform. Every once in a while, I had tears rolling down my face and choking with laughter from John Hughes' jokes. I would try to sneak turning on a tape recorder, but he'd see me and say, no, 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 can't do that. He was just fabulous." So a little bit from all the liner notes in the CD, but to me, it's a way to just say, John, thank you for making such great films to help me through my childhood and make me laugh. I have never known anyone like you since who could do movies like you did. I don't know what you think, but
we could almost do an entire show about John Hughes movies.
We could,
because we've only scratched the surface. There's a whole bunch more that didn't make our list that are still really memorable movies that you probably might have forgotten about. Go, oh yeah, I remember that one. Probably deserving of its own section to talk about it. But yeah, for me, it was the same thing too. His movies, I think him and John Landis, probably those two directors in the comedy world, probably had, and then Abraham Zucker, those three probably all had some, hand on learning about comedy growing up in the 80s. But definitely John Hughes, he just had that something about getting to the soul of, especially with us as kids.
Yeah.
Just something I connected with growing up. And he did a lot of coming of age stories and, in a lot of his films. And yeah, it's, maybe it's just because we're adults now, so we don't connect to anything that's coming out now, but there was definitely a time where that was a unique 80s thing that I don't know if it'll ever be replicated again.
I know. I do have one more little surprise. This is really for our friend. This is really for our friend Brendan, who is a Ghostbuster true and true, but being such a lover of music, and one thing I really like from the 80s, they did a lot of remixes. And I don't know why more people don't search out remixes. I think they're the coolest things ever because they take a song we know and you get to hear extra bits of it, and it's just longer. And I love how they'll take more instrumental parts where you can really just, with your ears, study the synth sounds and the beats and soak it in a new way, in a refreshing way. So I have collected a lot of 80s remixes over the years, and one I'm very proud to have found is a special remix of Ray Parker Jr.'s Ghostbusters song. It's actually called Searching for the Spirit. But Brandon, I wonder if you've ever heard of this one. On the back, you can see it's got a cool picture of Ray Parker Jr. with the Ghostbusters dancing. Definitely, it looks like a still photo, so this does not actually exist in the music video. But the Searching for the Spirit mix is, I don't know if you remember in the movie, but there's a part where they're dreaming and you hear this kind of harp, crescendo xylophone harp sound, and
in the middle of the regular song.
In the middle of the regular song.
Yeah,
well,
the kind of haunting area. Okay.
This has that
throughout
in
the
it.
whole song, throughout the whole thing.
No, but it's got that in the middle, just like in the movie. But
okay,
you never hear that anywhere. So, and it also starts out with more beats of the song, and there's extra little kind of ghost sounds and there's other stuff sprinkled in. And what I think is cool about it is this was made back then. It's not like something someone did today, but it's one of the records I'm very proud to own in my collection, and I thought it was fitting to share just with my Ghostbusters being number 2.
I'll have to hear that sometime because I don't think I've heard it.
I know most people, when I ask them if they want to listen to a remix, their eyes gloss over and they're like, "Oh, that's like a long version, isn't it?" Oh, I'm busy.
Some remixes are more creative than others. Some are just the same song, just it seemed like edited to last forever, and then some they do something completely different with it. I don't know where that one lands, but you know, I'm curious. On our next guys trip or something, you have to pop that in so I can check that out.
Remixes were actually created at the time to play in dance clubs.
Oh yeah, I remember. That time period. I would say specifically '87, which was that same year that Ferris Bueller came out. It was also the first year I went to my first club and experienced what, you know, dance music in a club was like. And I remember hearing all these cool techno songs. I don't think it was called techno then, but just dance songs that were remixed of other songs that were coming out. And I remember that was a pretty wild experience. I hadn't really heard remixes till I'd been in a club like that. And so, yeah, there are some that are very cool. But they sometimes remix it in the clubs. They're literally like blending one song to the next. It's like, whoa, that's cool. They blended Debbie Gibson with Silent Morning. That was awesome. But that was hot at the time. But
all right,
no, good stuff. Oh, I gotta do one line from Ferris. You speak English?
What country do you think this is?
Okay. I'm a professional. Professional what? Great stuff. All right, so that's it. Those were our top 5 80s comedies. I hope you guys enjoyed our show, and this has been a long one. I don't know how long it is, but I hope you enjoyed every step of the way with it. I am Norb.
And I am Mike.
And we are called The Watchmen.
The Men Who Watch. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching The Watchmen.
Please click on here to watch other episodes, and be sure to hit that like button too.
And please subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll always be alerted to any future episodes.
It really helps us out, and we appreciate it.
We'll see you next time. And remember, we'll be watching.